beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Karelian tradition. And for some reason, my live stream shut down unexpectedly right about this point a moment ago, so we're starting over. But welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. As you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you're watching on. And most of them will show up here in my chat room, at least if you're watching live. And I want to say good morning to Janet. Um, and it's good to see you, Janet. We are going to talk today about energy. And on Monday, we talked about animism. On Tuesday, we talked about shamanism. Today, we're talking about energy. And one of the things I want to start with is to talk a little bit about how these things contribute to one another. And hello to Bimby in the chat room. It's good to see you, Bimby. Yesterday, our guest was Chris Copeland. And among the things we talked about yesterday were my next books. Now that the Book of Astrology is finished, the order has been put in for it. They are being produced as we speak and will be sent to the people who pre-ordered them just as soon as they are ready. Hello to Reverend Michael in the chat room. And the next book is going to be Reverend Don's Book of Numerology and Reverend Don's Book of Energy. I'm going to be working on both of them at the same time. And hello to Antonio in the chat room. It's good to see you, Antonio. The Book of Energy is something that I think I probably should have written a while ago, because energy work is one of my big things. I'm very big on manifestational energy work and other sorts of energy work, much more than, for example, spell work. In a lot of ways, they're basically the same thing, but they differ in particulars. And energy work runs through all of my writings. If you've studied the degree materials, you'll notice they're full of lessons for dealing with energy, with the chakras, with the aura, with energy healing and energy transference. And in my mind, this really is the basis of magical, metaphysical work in general. Even spell work, which we mentioned, in the end, in my view, runs on energy. It runs on your energy, it runs on the energy of things that you may be interacting with. The biggest difference between what we would normally call energy work versus spell work is that spell work is more likely to work with external objects, but not necessarily. And um, in a lot of ways, these terms overlap, because when you do energy work, you often use external objects as well. For example, if you do energy healing, you may use various kinds of crystals, you may use various sorts of oils, you may use a lot of different things for their metaphysical properties, just as you might use them in a spell. So defining the exact difference between them, in my opinion, is not highly relevant. In the end, they all work on energy. And what do we mean by energy? We started the week with animism, and there's a reason we started there. And hello to Tom in the chat room, because it's intrinsic to the idea of energetic work. The idea of animism is that everything is alive. Everything has a spiritual essence, even if it is not animate, even if it is not what we would normally think of as sentient, it still has that spiritual element. Even if it's not necessarily what we think of as singular, it may still have that spiritual element. For example, a particular forest may have its own spirit, its own energy, just as the individual trees have their own energy. But there can be a conglomerate energy as well. There is a belief that entire species and sections of species have their conglomerate energy. And there are various terms for this. But the idea is that everything in an animistic understanding has its spiritual essence. The computer I'm talking to you through has its spiritual essence. The phone or computer that you're watching this on has its spiritual essence. Everything has a spiritual essence. That's animism. In energy, we call that spiritual essence, well, energy. In energetic work, we're working with that spiritual essence that everything has. And hello to Christine in the chat room. It's good to see you, Christine. And to begin the discussion of energy, we need to start with that idea that everything has energy or spiritual essence. In the first degree lessons, this is basically where I start. I When I wrote the first degree lessons, I felt that most materials that were available wildly over relied on all of the externals and hardly ever got to the internal understanding until either late in the material or farther on beyond the written material. I wanted to explain why at the beginning. And so we began by talking about how the whole universe is made of energy. Everything is made of energy. You are made of energy. Your computer is made of energy. Your phone is made of energy. Um, the clothing you're wearing ultimately is made of energy. And they all have their own spiritual essence. And you can interact with all of them at certain levels. Now, you can't necessarily interact with all of them at quite the same level because it depends on the level they're at as well as the level you're at. But we constantly interact energetically with everything we deal with everyone we deal with. And hello to Nikki in the chat room. It's good to see you. I've spoken before. If you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you'll recognize this theme that in daily life, we're constantly putting out energy and picking up energy from all the people that we work with, all the places that we go. This is how we often will get a feeling. It's a sense in its own right. We pick up their energy, we get a feeling about them. When we learn how to work with energy, we can do this in a much more conscious manner, but we do it unconsciously all the time anyway. Um, and to me, that is probably the most important thing that I will ever say on any metaphysical subject, which is that most of this you do unconsciously, whether you're aware of it or not. A lot of people note the effects of this and brush them off in one way or another. Other people are aware of them, but don't think a lot about them. And those of us who actually work with metaphysics, who work with energy, study them and learn how to interact with them. So this is the nature of energy. It's everywhere, it's in everything. This brings us back to the ancient saying, as above, so below. The idea that the energy of which the universe is made is present in everything in the universe. And ultimately, it's all the same energy. We are in connection with all of it to the extent that we're willing to perceive it. This is why you can do a psychic reading for someone who is not in the same room with you. It's why you can do a psychic reading over the phone. It's why you can do a psychic reading over the computer. It's why you can do a psychic reading simply by mental connection with someone who may be on the other side of the planet. Because we're always in contact with the energy of the universe. This is also why some people will tell you that they will sometimes wake up and hear voices that they can't really understand, but they can hear them like a to borrow a science fiction term, like subspace chatter. And the idea is that they're picking up on the ambient thoughts of others at that time. And I found a number of people who've had this experience, myself included. Usually, you're not conscious of what you're picking up on, but you're aware that there are things moving around in the universe. When we do psychic work, we intentionally tie into these. We intentionally look for the information, and it's there to be received. Anyone who's done any amount of psychic work knows that it's there to be received. We've talked at considerable length about psychic work on this program. I've written about it extensively. But what it comes down to is tuning into the energy. So when we talk about energy, this is part of what we're talking about. And hello to Lady Rain in the chat room. It's good to see you, Lady Rain. Lady Rain is joining us from South Africa, where it's a very different hour than it is here. Thank you for joining us, Lady Rain. I had the wonderful experience of getting to spend time with Lady Rain at the Parliament of World's Religions last year, which was delightful. And I've also visited her in Africa. Um, Beautiful person. And all of our people, well, for the most part, all of our people everywhere are beautiful people. Um, but I really did very much enjoy my time visiting our people in South Africa. When we talk about energy, therefore, we're really talking about everything in our universe and being able to interact with that. So, what do we do with energy? We do psychic readings with it. We pick up feelings from it. We do healing through energy. Reiki is probably the best known at present form of energy healing. Pranic healing is another. There are other forms of energy healing that don't necessarily have formal names. I first learned energy healing just as energy healing, and it had little bits of different things in it that my teachers had learned from different schools. I subsequently studied pranic and Reiki healing in greater detail, but it all works through energy. The biggest difference, in my opinion, between pranic healing and Reiki healing is that Reiki basically relies on the energy to do its own work, whereas you play a more active role when you do pranic healing. But they're both working with people's energy. They're working with the same energy we're talking about in connection with all these other things. People use crystals for healing often, but this is energetic healing. It's using the energetic property of the crystal to interact with the energetic properties of the person being healed and the healer. Um, there are many different ways that we use energy for healing. This is a very important use of energy. We also use energy for cleansing. When you do a space blessing, you're ultimately cleansing the energy and then charging the energy to have a positive vibration. You're removing the negativity, which doesn't necessarily mean um, oogie boogie, evil negative energy. Negative energy need be nothing more than uncharged energy, static energy that is just kind of clogging up the works. You clear that out. You fill it with new energy that is charged positively. That's what an energetic cleansing is on a person, on a space, on an item, a major use of energy. Um, these are all different things. We give blessings with energy, which basically is taking that positive energy and putting it into a person or a thing to convey um, an uplifting energy to them. We use energy for consecration of items. We use energy for endless purposes. When we talk about energy, ultimately, the subject is pretty limitless. Um, but we don't always define things necessarily using that term. So I say most, many of the things that we do energetically, we may put under other headings such as psychic work, spellcraft, etc. But in the end, it's all about the interaction of the energy. This is one of the reasons I am working on Reverend Don's Book of Energy to talk a little bit more about this. One of the things that I particularly have done with energy, and we'll be doing certainly more of, is working with the crystal web. If you follow this program, you will have encountered the crystal web on a number of occasions. We've done a number of crystal web ceremonies here on the program. The crystal web is an energetic engine. It is, to the best of my knowledge, the largest energetic engine ever created. It has centers all over the planet. Um, Even in Antarctica, which I probably mention far too often, but I've never failed to be impressed that there are crystal access points in Antarctica. I never expected to see that. There are two of them, in fact. Um, the crystal web is an energetic construct. It ties together the crystal access points all over the world. It was created by Ed the Pagan on beginning on 8888, many, many years ago, and has expanded around the world in all the intervening years and continues to expand. And for me, the next significant crystal web ritual I plan to do is for the upcoming solar eclipse. And I hope that you will join me for that and that you will bring your crystals for that. But that is an example of energetic work. Um, we will bless our crystals. We will open the web. We will work with the energy of the universe, the energy of the eclipse, the energy of the web. Um, this is all energetic working. Now, what is the point of that? Part of it is to attune to the energy of this particular moment. In Karelian tradition, we've done a great deal of work with both solar and lunar eclipses. To us, they represent rebirth, renewal, regeneration, and we've been doing crystal web rituals with particularly solar eclipses all the way back to 1990. Oh, two maybe? I would have to actually consult the date, but that was the earliest, specifically Karelian um, interaction with the crystal web on a solar eclipse. Lady Crystal and I created an access point at Greenwood House, where I grew up, which, to the best of my knowledge, is still there. And we tied ourselves very much to that energy of renewal. We attuned to it. This is part of the idea of all of our sabbats and esbats in Wiccan practice, to attune to the psychic tide, the energies of the universe. The idea that each moment has its unique energy, and that by attuning to that energy, we bring it into our lives and help ourselves to move in accordance with the way the universe is going at that moment. Now, we can also go at variance from that energy, because often in life we simply have to. Um, but when we can move in concert with it, everything will be easier. When we're talking about something like the solar eclipse, which is about rebirth, renewal, rejuvenation, cleansing, um, it helps us to do these things in our lives. We can do them otherwise, of course, but by picking a time when the universe itself is focused on this, we make it easier. This, to me, is one of the most important parts of working with energy, the idea of attuning to what is naturally happening. Now, I'll also be the first person to tell you that you must not be bound by that. You must do what you need to do when you need to do it. But if it so happens that you can do it when the universe is already moving that way, so much the better. Um, every month we have the lunar cycle, which begins with the waxing moon, which is a good time for starting anything new. Um, extra energy at the full moon, good time for releasing during the waning moon. And if you're able to time your workings to that natural schedule, they're going to be easier for you. But of course, we can't always do that. My favorite saying on this subject is, if your magic isn't going to help you when the car is skidding off the road, what have you been doing? You have to be able to use it when you need it. And so, in addition to attuning ourselves to those natural cycles, we also learn how to work with energy regardless of what's going on. And this is also a very important part of working with energy, that it's not only a matter of attuning yourself to what's naturally happening, but also learning how to do what you need to do regardless of what's going on. This is one of the reasons I often say, some people are born with a natural ability in psychic work. But I always encourage such people to go ahead and get training in how to use this consciously, because I believe that when you have that natural ability, you're pulling it through from things you've learned in another lifetime, but you often don't know for sure if you're pulling everything through. I found that most people who are natural psychics, um, or who have a natural bent for magic, don't always know everything they need to know. And so, even if you think of it as a refresher, I still think it's good to study. When we study, we learn how to do things like not necessarily going with what those natural energies are, but doing what we need to do when we need to do it. We also learn how to turn it off. I met a woman recently who told me that one of her biggest problems as a natural psychic was she couldn't turn it off. It was always there. She didn't really understand how to control it. I was taught psychic skills in a manner that very strongly relied on grounding and the ability to turn it on when you want it and turn it off when you don't, because you don't always want it. I found that people who cannot turn it off often become somewhat unbalanced through it, often find themselves with experiences they really didn't want through it. Not always, but often. Um, and if something really needs to get to you, it will come through anyway. Your guides are still there working with you. And speaking of energy, one of the things I'm very big on is working with spirit guides and the ancestors. How do we do that? We do that through energy. When we talk about psychic communications, they're energetic in character. One of the things that I like to point out to people is that spirits don't have mouths. They communicate through concept, through telepathy, if you would. There are no words per se. You will receive it in all likelihood as words, but you're the one supplying the words. And it may not come to you as words. It may come to you as pictures. It may come to you as simply a knowing. But any of these things, what happens is that the message comes to you energetically, and then your mind has to interpret it. And so, if you're going to be doing this kind of work, the wider field of reference you have, the better off you're going to be. This is true also when doing things like energetic healing. When I do energetic healing, I don't necessarily know what exactly is being healed. It depends on the technique being used. But a lot of times, when I've done energetic healing, I've been focused on removing blockages, and often had a knowledge of what the blockage was, not necessarily in what caused it, but in the quality of the energy. But this knowledge would come usually in a pictorial form or a sensational form. It's been my experience that the older the blockage, the more solid it feels. And they can, in fact, feel very solid energetically as you're working with them. When they're newer, they're much more, for one better way to put it, liquid. And that's how you can tell how old an issue you're working with. These are all different aspects of working with things energetically. Obviously, today, I'm not going into great detail about any of them, uh, but I think my message today is how much this actually underlies everything that we do. Um, at least in the sort of metaphysics I practice, the sort of metaphysics I teach. Um, in the end, it's all ultimately energetic, even when we don't think of it that way. Yeah, I've been talking on a few occasions recently about Ghostbuster programs that I have found myself subjected to recently. And they run the gamut from some that are relatively respectable to some that are basically slapstick comedy, in my opinion. But paranormal research, which is a real thing that I do take seriously, when it's done seriously, is all about energy. Um, if you are, if you're doing a séance, you're working with energy. If you are investigating a haunting, for example, you're working with the energy. You're trying to pick up on that energy. everything in the end is energy. So that kind of is my message for today. And I probably will be talking more about this. Well, I know I'll be talking more about it in the future. Um, but in a lot of ways, this is kind of an overview of how everything depends on an understanding of energy and energetics. And hello to R. Simmons in the chat room. R. Simmons says, "Are you the church?" I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Um, if you're referring to if you're referring to the Karelian nativist church, no one person is the church. Um, in fact, I don't think anything that calls itself a church is one person. But if you're asking if I'm with it, well, yes, I have affiliation with actually a number of religious organizations. Certainly, the Karelian nativist church. I was the head of the organization for many years. I'm now retired in that capacity. Um, but when we talk about something like a church or a temple or so forth, it's never one person. It's an organization. It's a group of people who come together because they share that spirituality. And some people may think it's all about one person. And I certainly have seen people behave that way. Um, I've seen a few people who definitely seem to have that attitude in the last year, but it's never that way. Um, it's always a group effort, and any such organization runs primarily on consensus and compromise. Um, I'm the last person who will ever endorse the idea of consensus decision making. I think that's a terrible, terrible system. But the idea of having a consensus is vitally important in any organization, and no organization is going to stand without one. It's always, when you're in a position of responsibility in certainly a religious organization, it's always us. It's always we. It's never really about you. And I see a lot of people who don't seem to understand that, and they usually come to a bad end through it. Um, but I can cannot say too strongly that when you're in a position of any sort of spiritual leadership, you're not acting for yourself, you're acting for the group. And this is vitally important to remember. And this brings us back again to energy, because any group has its own energy. We were talking earlier about how a forest has its own energy, even though the individual trees all have their own energy. But the group of them have a conglomerate energy between them. We might call it an egregore. This is true for groups as well. They all have their own character, and um, they all have their own conglomerate energy that's made of all the people who are involved. And it's never just one. And that is true for any organization. It's true for families. It's true for anything you might be involved in. There's always your energy, and there's all the energy around you, and it all interacts. So with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour, and and hello to Nicholas in the chat room. It's good to see you, Nicholas. Um, Again, the order for Reverend Don's Book of Astrology is at the publisher. It's being printed as we speak, and as soon as we have it in our hands, we'll be mailing it to all the people who have pre-ordered it. And if you're interested in one, you can certainly still pre-order one through um, CarelianPublishing.com. And I hope that you have a lovely day, and let us close with our prayer as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to be mindful of our own energy and to keep it clear and focused and positively charged, and help us to be mindful of all the energy around us and how we interact with it, and to keep ourselves surrounded by positive energy. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks, and knowing you're always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. I will see you again tomorrow.